Buckle your seatbelt. It's time for another episode of the Prepper Recon Podcast.
After a massive wave of disappearances, 26-year-old CIA analyst Everett Carroll finally believes what he's been told about the biblical prophecy of the rapture. Global currencies have collapsed, famine and plague have claimed the lives of millions, and the world has crumbled into chaos. 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 vials of God's wrath are about to be poured out upon the earth, and woe to the inhabitants thereof. Buy your copy of The Days of Elijah, Book 1, Apocalypse, by best-selling author Mark Goodwin, in paperback or Kindle edition from Amazon.com today.
Whether your plan is to bug out or bug in, CampingSurvival.com has all of your preparedness needs, including fish antibiotics, long-term storage food, and water filters. Use coupon code PREPRECON for 5% off your order at CampingSurvival.com. Today's guest is Tom Abrams, author of the post-apocalyptic bestseller Home. Tom, welcome to the show.
Mark, thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
Oh, absolutely. I saw your book when it popped up on the Christian futuristic category. Besides being a writer myself, I'm a big fan of the post-apocalyptic genre, but I'm just so often repulsed by the language that I've all but given up trying to find any good post-apocalyptic fiction to read myself. And when I saw it pop up, I decided to give Home a try, and I'm really glad I did. It was a great read, and you managed to pull it off with no profanity.
Yeah, it's just something that I chose to do when I started writing. Nothing against authors who use profanity. I have no judgment there, and I love plenty of authors who do. But I just chose in my writing to see if I could do it without it, and I seem to be able to work around it. I know sometimes maybe there are circumstances in the apocalypse where people would naturally curse. I try to get around that a little bit, but much like you'll find some comics work clean as opposed to blue, I just am more comfortable writing in an environment where I'm not using foul language. There's plenty of violence, but no 4-letter words.
Yeah, there's a little violence in the Bible too. So
true.
There is. If that's your gauge, it's pretty easy to come under the threshold of violence in that book. So I really enjoyed the way you opened the book. You're 5 years into the apocalypse when it opens, and you just really thrust the reader straight into the action. And you go straight into a firefight, and then you kind of like jump back and fill in all those details of what happened and how battle got to where he is, and how everything had sort of come to that point. And I think that's a really interesting way to write.
Thank you. There are a fair number of people who love that flashback element of the book, and then there are some who didn't like it. They found it confusing, but I feel like the flashback is an outstanding way to give a character some depth, to tell you where he's come from without, in a sense, boring the reader with all this build-up. Rather than spending the first third of the book building the characters, I decided to get right into the action and then slowly reveal, through the course really of 3 books, who the main character is, what he struggles with, what he lost, and how he really struggles with his faith. Being someone who is violent and is trying to survive, at the same time, he's trying to be a good guy and do what's right. And those are 2 things that often conflict. And I think that isn't just found in the apocalypse, but I think in our everyday lives that happens too. And so I just felt like the flashback was a good way to set that whole thing up.
Yeah, and I think you did a fantastic job with that. And you're right. And sometimes when you have to spend 3 or 4 chapters of getting to the action, a lot of readers they wonder if the investment's going to pay off, if they're going to get some action. And when you take them straight into the action and then flash back, they know they're going to get the action. And I think that was a really clever way to do that. And once again on skipping the profanity, I think that you made a good choice. I think it's a good business decision, because especially the post-apocalyptic genre is so big among preppers, and within preppers, there's such a large percentage of us that are really staunch Christians, and people like myself that we just won't read stuff if it's got profanity. So I think that the writers that choose not to put profanity in their work, they get a bigger market share, because I don't think you alienate anybody by not putting profanity, but when you put it in there, I think you alienate a large percentage or potential market. So I think it's a good business decision.
Thanks. I don't think I just initially thought of it as a business decision. It was just kind of how I chose to write. But I think you're right. You have nothing to lose by writing without profanity, and maybe you lose some people if you do. And I do find that I get more comments of people noticing that there's no profanity than people commenting that it was unrealistic because there was no profanity. And I don't just do it in the post-apocalyptic genre. I write action, adventure, and conspiracy thrillers too, and I don't use any language in those books either.
And what inspired you to write the book?
Good question, and I'll give you the short an answer as possible. So I started out by writing political conspiracies, and I really enjoyed that, and really felt this creative release, by crafting these very complicated, convoluted stories that all come together at the end, sort of like a Clancy novel when you have all these disparate pieces that come together. And then I got asked by a writer friend of mine, Stephen Conkley, to write in his Kindle World. For those who don't know, Kindle World is essentially licensed fan fiction through Amazon. And when he launched a world based on his Perseid Collapse series, he asked me to write a novella based in his world, and I wrote 3 of them, and they did pretty well. And I found that writing in the post-apocalyptic genre was very linear. I didn't need all these complicated, different scenarios all combining into one to make for a great thriller. It could be very linear and straightforward and just about surviving. And I really liked the idea of writing in that world. And so I decided, after finishing a book I had committed to that was a conspiracy novel, I decided the next thing I was going to write was going to be post-apocalyptic. But I decided that I didn't want it to be about the apocalypse itself. I wanted it to take place in a world where the apocalypse had already happened. And I think maybe I got that idea, a little bit from Cormac McCarthy's The Road. The road happens after the apocalypse. And I really liked that idea. I also wanted it to kind of be a little bit of a Western. I think the Western genre really meshes very well with the post-apocalyptic idea of the world, especially living here in Texas and wanting to tell the story in Texas. So that's kind of how it generated itself. And originally it was just going to be one book, and then I decided that I had so much I wanted to tell, and that I wanted to really build the main character's arc in a way that took more than one book to do it. And so I put it into 3 books. And the reception has been far beyond what I ever thought it would be.
And you mentioned that just being in Texas sort of makes it a Western, and that's a very big part of the culture in that part of the country, isn't it? The cowboy hat and the boots and the belt buckles and things.
It is and it isn't, right? I mean, we still have rodeos, and you'll still sometimes see horses along the side of the road, and people have ranches. But Houston is also the 3rd largest city in the country, or 4th largest city in the country, soon to be the 3rd largest. Very metropolitan, very diverse, and so you find a little bit of both worlds. But I think if you were to strip away the modern conveniences of air conditioning and automobiles and oil, you'd find yourself back where you were 150 years ago.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. The dollar's lost over 90% of its purchasing power since 1971. Silver, on the other hand, has proven to be a very stable form of wealth preservation over the years. And where do you buy silver? Silver.com, of course. Silver.com offers fantastic prices on gold and silver. Check out silver.com today. If you're near Cincinnati, start making plans to come see me at the Cincy Preparedness Expo at the Sharonville Convention Center on October 15th and 16th. Besides all of the fantastic prepper gear available, it's a great place to learn vital survival skills. And make sure you stop by the Prepper Recon booth to say hi. Check out cincypreparednessexpo.com for tickets and information. You seem like you know your stuff when it comes to preparedness. Do you consider yourself a prepper?
I'm a prepper light. Living in a hurricane-prone area like Southeast Texas, you have to always be prepared for the power to go out. We were victimized by Hurricane Ike. While we didn't lose our property, we did lose power for almost 2 weeks. We have a generator. We have we opted for regular water heaters because they run on natural gas as opposed to kind of the hip thing or the tankless water heaters, which don't work if there's no electricity. We always have an extra stash of water and of canned goods because you just never know. Between the flooding that happens here and the hurricanes we're prone to get, we are prepared probably for 2 to 3 weeks. Any longer than that, and it begins to be an issue. But so we are prepared, but not necessarily preppers in the sense that we could. I certainly don't have a bunker like Marcus Battle does in home.
Oh yeah, I think very few of us actually have bunkers, but and it's easy to build on that food supply. Now, what did you do before you were a writer?
Well, I'm a TV journalist. Still do that. Writing is my hobby. My full-time job is I'm a television reporter and anchor at a TV station here in Houston. I've done it for about 25 years. I've been here in Houston since 1999, and so that's my day job. And writing is what I do for fun.
In the book, Battle is a vet, and like a lot of vets in real life, he's seen what a real life post-apocalyptic landscape looks like, just from being in war-torn areas. Is that the thing that causes him to take his family to a more survivable location?
Yes, and you learn throughout the course of the 3 books what it is that drives him to do that, to become a prepper. In the books, which take place in the future, there has been a war in Syria, and which isn't that far-fetched, right? And so during the war in Syria, he saw things which led him to understand the need for being prepared to take care of yourself, to not rely on the government to provide for you in extreme circumstances. And so when he gets back from the war, also suffering from what his wife believes is PTSD, he decides to buy some land and slowly but surely build a compound that will protect him and his family when something catastrophic happens. He underestimates a few things and miscalculates them, but that's his idea, is to prevent his family from suffering through what he witnessed families suffering through during the time that he served in Syria. And a big part of book 2, there's 2 stories. There's what's going on in the main storyline, and then there's also a flashback to a pivotal time in his life when he was in Syria that really forced him to look at the world a different way.
And I think that's exactly what we see with a lot of vets that come back, and there's very, very high percentage of preppers are former military, and like you said, they've seen that, and they know what it looks like to see depravity and to see just a collapsed economy. They know what it looks like to see a collapsed political system, and they see sort of the scum that sort of rises to the top when all those counter forces go away, when you don't have a good government system, you don't have a good economy, and all the things that go along with that. And so and I'm sure they see a lot of these people, and in some of these countries, and they'll be in some of the larger cities, it wasn't always like that. They had something that looked not that, probably not first world like America, but certainly not the world war-torn ruins that they're living in now. So, and then they're able to project that onto America and say, we could end up like that. Do you have any personal convictions? Do you think that America is immune to that type of a collapse, or is that something that you see as being possible in a war or a political or perhaps economic collapse?
I don't think any place is immune from it. I don't know that I think we're on the edge of it as much as some might think, that we're right there on the precipice about to fall off. But it doesn't take much for, particularly given our dependence on technology, it doesn't take much for an economic collapse that then triggers all these other things. It doesn't take much for there to be a series of natural disasters that then trigger all these other things. I don't know that I see the United States being invaded and taken over and or destroyed by a foreign power, but I do see there being a lot of circumstances in which our world changes for the worse and people won't be prepared. I'm not a conspiracy theorist despite writing conspiracy novels, but I don't think we're immune from what ails the rest of the world in any way. I mean, you look at France, and who would have thought 5 years ago that they'd be struggling with the level of terrorism that they're dealing with now, and so that Western advanced economy is struggling because of that threat. It doesn't take much for things to tip the other way.
And without giving away the whole story, you mentioned Battle had made some solid plans to keep his family safe. But as you mentioned also, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry, don't they?
They do. And I think, thank you for the Steinbeck reference, because I try to draw a little bit on him in terms of creating this desolate Western place. And it's a little stylized. It's a little, comic bookish in places, but that's intentional to create this feel, this world. But yes, and I think in teasing the book that, he thought he was prepared, he thought his family was safe, and he was wrong. So it's not giving anything away to let you know that, because you learn it in the very early pages, that he's by himself and that his family did not survive. You just don't know initially what happened. And you learn in the first book what happened to his family and how he failed them and how he struggles with that and how he's very slowly going crazy. And I've gotten some criticism from some saying that, well, a guy with his military experience would never behave the way he behaves. He would never give up the tactical advantages that he does. But as the book advances, you realize that he's not really who he was. He's not the same soldier that he was when he served, that he's kind of gone a little crazy and nuts, having been isolated by himself for 5 years. And he constantly makes mistakes that would get a lot of people killed. And
I think that's so true to life. In planning, you think about anything that you've ever planned in your life, and it's if it's a vacation to Disneyland, and you thought you were going to get there, you thought you were going to get to the hotel at 8:00, and you thought you were going to get up at 6 a.m. the next morning. You thought you were going to be at the park when the gates opened, whatever. It never works out like that because there's a truck jackknife on the way, so you don't get to the hotel until 1:00 in the morning, and so then you're too tired, so you can't get up at 6, and then you end up at 7, and you're tired, and you need an extra cup of coffee, and it's 10:30 by the time you get to the park. So I think that happens also when people are trying to plan for some post-apocalyptic event in prepping. If you're planning for a zombie apocalypse and you've got food and weapon systems and security and water purification and things like that, you're going to be much better off if there's an economic collapse, because you're somewhat prepared for something. And then for the folks that are planned for an economic collapse and you actually have one, there's going to be things that they never saw coming, and there's going to be things that played out completely different than the way they anticipated them to play out. And I think that battle's a really good reminder to all of us that, you know, you have to have some flexibility in your plan and not to get too tight with it.
Yeah, and you can't plan for human nature.
No, that's right. And disaster, disaster is the definition of it is something went really wrong. So when things go wrong, they don't go wrong according to a plan. The whole definition is there is no plan, and
right.
that's why we're in such a situation.
No, I agree with that, and I think you find that, and in my next series, which is very different from Home, but also post-apocalyptic, you find that no matter how much you plan, you can't anticipate everything.
That's the end of the first half of my interview with author Tom Abrams. Tune in next week for the rest of the show. Trading Post in the Woods is ran by veteran crisis responders who know how important it is to be prepared. They specialize in comprehensive natural survival remedy kits, preparedness and homesteading supplies, as well as skills training. Visit them online today at tradingpostinthewoods.com.